Welcome to another episode of Conduitao Climate Change Leadership Series. Today we'll be focusing on a topic titled Bringing First World Farmers and Agriculture into the Climate Change Conversation. And today we are being joined by Gabriela Warrior Renaud, and she is going to converse more about the topic in discussion today. So, Gabby, welcome.
Hi, Taku. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. What I would like to ask you a question, maybe to just introduce yourself to the audience and like what does your organization do and what is the nature of your work for it?
Absolutely. So I work with an organization called Farmers for Climate Solutions. I'm the communications manager with this organization. And we are a pan-Canadian coalition, which means that we work across the country, across Canada. We are a coalition made up of farmer-led and farmer-supporting organizations. And we currently have 24 members spread across Canada. And together, our membership represents over 20,000 farmers and ranchers. And we really represent all scales and types of production. And we're a fairly new organization. We launched in 2020. And our main focus when we launched was really to push climate-focused policy in agriculture. And more recently, we've just launched a mentorship and training program that really brings to life our policy recommendation work by providing training to farmers who want to adopt climate-friendly farming practices.
Thank you so much. I think you've just touched some parts of my next question, but maybe there are also parts that I would like to understand more about. Where does your organization operate from, and what is your sphere of influence?
So we are a national coalition, which means that we are not regional specific. We work with farmers and ranchers across the country, and our members represent organizations who work at a national scale and also provincial and regional scales as well. The name of our organization kind of speaks to who we talk to. We're farmers for climate solutions, but we have a growing community of farmers and non-farmer supporters as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. You mentioned that you are the communications manager for the organization that is Farmers for Climate Solutions. I would like you to explain how you relay messages to different Canadian farmers.
Mm-hmm. So we are a very small but mighty team at Farmers for Climate Solutions. So as the communications manager, I do a lot of other things as well, which is, I think, the nature of nonprofit work. My specific role, I really help to amplify our policy recommendation work. So I plan effective campaigns, I design and create captivating reports, I make sure that our content looks good across our digital platforms, and I help to grow our community of farmers and supporters, making sure that these folks have the tools they need to help us grow our reach. And to answer your question specifically on how we talk to Canadian farmers. So like I mentioned before, we really are a farmer-led organization. So farmers are an integral part of our team and the way that we make our decisions. So my role really is to help amplify farmer voices and, make sure that they have the tools they need to communicate effectively and feel confident in delivering their message. But we also speak to other farmers across the country, and we do that mostly through communications, online communications like social media, newsletters, emails. But what we also do is we want to make sure that farmer voices are present during government meetings when we do our policy and advocacy work, and also in the media. So ensuring that farmers are present, in media interviews, print articles, that kind of stuff. And it's really important for us that farmers know that we don't represent government or large agricultural corporations. We are farmers representing farmers, and our messaging is always farmer-led. Our communications are always written from the farmer perspective.
That's great. Um, maybe you mentioned something that I would like you to elaborate more on.
Mhm.
You say that you're a farmer-led organization and you work with farmers, and I would like to know whether these farmers, you would communicate to these farmers after they have maybe established some membership with you, or you can only communicate, you accept all walk-ins and anyone who reaches out to you. Is
Right.
there any sort of membership or not?
Yes, so we are a member-based organization. We have 24 members who are farmer-led and or farmer-supporting organizations themselves. So no, we don't just have people kind of come. We are a membership-based organization. So if all the farmers who are participating either in our working groups or part of our task forces, they are members of these organizations who themselves are usually member based. So, for example, if you look at our website on our About page, there's a list of all the members who are members of Farmers for Climate Solutions. But for example, a farmer who farms in the area that I live in the Ottawa region in Canada, they may be members of several organizations, maybe they're national organizations representing them, and maybe they're regional farmer organization that represents this area.
Awesome, thank you. Um, Maybe let's talk about the climate change a bit. I
Sure.
noticed that on your website, the organization's website, that the organization advocates for making agriculture part of the solution to climate change. What are the policies in place to broaden the climate change conversation among farmers to ensure that nobody is left behind?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to be frank, there was not much of this, which is why Farmers for Climate Solutions was started. Um, farmers have been doing this work on their own without government support for a very long time. They have changed the way that they farm, they've built their own infrastructure, they've updated their operations to lower their emissions and to increase the resilience of their land and their crops. Um, but we are now seeing policies and programs that offer direct support for farmers who want to make these changes, which can be really expensive upfront. And this is a direct result of the advocacy work that groups like Farmers for Climate Solutions has been doing. And just to give you an example, last year the federal government launched a program called the On-Farm Climate Action Fund to support farmers to adopt climate-friendly farming practices, which was the direct result of our advocacy. So we were really seeing a lack in climate-specific policy in agriculture before our coalition began its work. I think it really speaks to the power of this coalition movement. We represent members who've been doing this kind of work for many years on their own. And there was a real need to work together to use the power of their collective voice to make these kinds of changes. And we've seen that impact. We've seen the federal government really listen to these farmer groups. And, we come to government with costed and really detailed recommendations and policy ideas and solutions. And they see that work as really beneficial and valuable. And we've seen that turn into programs like the On-Farm Climate Action Fund and other policies that are starting to become more available for farmers now.
That's great. Um, just maybe going back a bit to what you mentioned that the Farmers for Climate Solutions was created in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to find out more about that since it was right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, how did that work out for you? What were the challenges and uh, how exactly did you manage to tackle some of the challenges that you faced because of the limited of the COVID-19 restrictions?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. And that's a great point. When we first started the coalition, the pandemic was not present in our lives. And as we launched the coalition, the pandemic really affected everyone, and we really had to shift gears. Pushing for climate policy was really our main focus, but now we were challenged with the added pressure and challenge and risk that COVID-19 was adding to farmers as well. So we actually put together a research project and a policy recommendations paper specifically on COVID-19 and what a recovery looks like, and how we can support farmers through not only climate risk, but also the risks that COVID-19 and the pandemic was bringing to their operation. So it definitely impacted the first year of our work, where we had to look at some of these new risks and really put forward some recommendations to make sure that farmers were supported through the pandemic as well.
Thank you. Awesome. This is getting interesting because we are moving on to my favorite subject, which is climate change communication. I'm very much interested in that, and I have a bias toward that because I feel that a lot of people are not treating climate change with this seriousness because they don't know much about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you, that what are your thoughts on engaging the broadcast media as a stakeholder in climate change communication?
I mean, I think that media is a critical player in our conversation about climate change. We really rely on the media to tell us what current crises are and what crisis needs our attention, in a similar way to how media really framed the COVID-19 pandemic and our understanding of it as a crisis. I think there is a real they play a really critical part in doing the same thing for climate change. It's really important for us to see the impacts of climate change in our media and in the news so that we can really understand that this is a global issue. This isn't political. This is a crisis that we really need to act on. And I think media as a stakeholder is a really important player in this conversation.
Great. Still commenting on that, a lot of journalists say that it is difficult for them to report or to write about climate change because they don't know much about it. They are not in a better position to break down the jargon that is used by climate scientists to
Mm-hmm.
make it palatable for the ordinary people. So what's your comment on that? Can you put forth a solutions to that?
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you one thing that we try to do is, and it's kind of happened very organically, but the way that we really amplify farmer voices and make sure that the media interviews that Farmers for Climate Solutions does is really the farmers who are leading our work, because they really ground climate impacts in real experiences. I think if you're listening to the radio and you hear a farmer saying, I seeded my crops last week, but it got too hot, which means that my seeds couldn't germinate and I've lost a lot of my crop this year. Or, my blueberries were doing great, but last week we got BC last year suffered a heat dome and the fruit on my blueberry bushes literally cooked in the sun, which means that I lost 80% of my crops. I think that is a much more accessible, understandable piece of information than scientific. I think it's really important to back this stuff with scientific data, but to have farmer voices talk about their experience, it just really grounds the scientific information in truth and in real life experience that people can understand.
Great. That's awesome. I'm in support of that. Is that the kind of work that you are doing for part of your work that you are doing for the Farmers for Climate Solutions? Like
Yes,
breaking
it
down the
is.
language?
Yeah. So we, as a farmer-led group and coalition, part of our work is, like I mentioned before, giving farmers the tools they need to feel confident in delivering a message. So we have a really wonderful group of farmer ambassadors who act as spokespeople for Farmers for Climate Solutions, and they receive training from me and my team to ensure that they feel confident, taking media interviews and, understanding how to translate their stories and their experience and what they've observed on their farm over the years into a really compelling story that people can understand and feel like they can take action. I mean, one really important thing that we do as well is we are solutions oriented. We are hopeful. We come with solutions. So the climate crisis is real and it is threatening farmer livelihoods and, our ability to grow food. But there are solutions, and there are a lot of farmers who are already doing amazing work. What we're advocating for is just more support so that they can do this work, which, in the end benefits all of us. So that's a really big part of what I do as well.
Okay. So I have noticed something, maybe in the previous episodes of this podcast, that some people, some guests from the global south, indicated that there was little knowledge among targeted groups about climate change. They implemented some solutions. They've implemented some projects that would obviously ameliorate the situation, but they didn't know that they were fighting climate change. So I'm also interested to know about what the Canadian farmers know about climate change and communicate about it. What is it exactly that they know and communicate?
I mean, as we know, farming is fully dependent on our weather. So I think, weather changes, as that changes more drastically and unexpectedly, farming operations are really the first to feel the effects of that. So I think farmers have an acute understanding of weather patterns and weather changing throughout the course of their growing seasons. And they might not call it climate change, but I think that link between weather and their farming is, very linked, and it's not something that, like, it's understood as dependent of each other. I can't speak for farmers globally, but I know that farmers in Canada know about the changing climate, and they are doing their best to adapt and change their practices to help reduce those impacts of climate change. They are, as I said at the top of the interview here, they're changing their practices to make sure that they lower their emissions, and that they build up the resilience of their land, meaning that if there's a big downpour of rain, their land is able to soak up that moisture and retain it, that kind of stuff, to keep the soil cool. I think it's really important for non-farmers to also understand that farmers are also facing a lot of other challenges outside of climate and weather patterns. Their margins are very small. Equipment is really expensive. There's a lot of risks in being a farmer. And I think if we're asking farmers to also provide us with these incredible environmental benefits, managing biodiversity and these ecosystems, providing soil health, regenerating soil, all these kinds of things, that's what we're advocating for, is that we partner with farmers to share those costs, to share those risks, because they can't do that alone. So I think that's what we focus on here in Canada with farmers. Because we know that a lot of farmers know about climate change, they're doing their best, but they're also really struggling to make ends meet and all the other costs and risks associated with farming. So really asking the government to step in and provide a helping hand, because either they know about climate change or they don't know, because they are, flooded with all these other challenges and risks that they're trying to juggle at the same time. So I think this is a really important way in making sure that our food system is sustainable, because these really are benefits that, are benefits for all of us, it's not just about the food that we eat, it goes far beyond that.
Okay, great. When I came over to this side of the world, I noticed something that is different with where I come from. I originally come from Zimbabwe. And when we buy our food in the supermarket, we don't usually read the contents. Like we don't read the ingredients because there is little or no harm that is usually associated with the ingredients in our food. But when I came here, I found that that is a really serious subject because somebody would say that you have to avoid gluttony at all costs. And you have to avoid this ingredient and this ingredient because the food here is inorganic. So you would have to buy the organic food. So I noticed that maybe the challenge with that can go back to farming. Like when I started studying about soil health, I found out that there is a certain term which they call carbon sequestration. And this has to do with the limiting the amount of carbon in the atmosphere so that it gets stored in the soil. Because there are microorganisms that are in the soil, bio life that is in the soil. So I was just thinking about that. Related to that, um, are there any topics that you prioritize within your organization or within your communication more than others?
That's a big question. I think, like I keep bringing up, is this advocating for direct support for farmers who are already doing a lot of this work. When you were speaking, I was thinking about a growing movement of regenerative farming here in Canada that has a lot of different names as well. But the essence is that as you're farming, you're taking nutrients out of the soil and really using your farming practice to help build that soil and biodiversity. So this movement is really growing in Canada, but a lot of that shift that farmers will have to do does come at a cost for them. So, making sure that farmers have the money, the financial security to take these risks and to change their practices is really important. And I think that is what we focus on. We really focus on celebrating the farmers who have been doing this kind of work before and using them as an example and as sort of climate champions to show to help inspire others. If you see a farmer who has a similar operation than your own, who's been quite successful in adapting their practices and changing the way they farm to reduce their emissions and to grow their resilience, you can see yourself in that and think, okay, I can do the same thing and also have success. If there's government programs that are easy to access that, you can see yourself in and think, okay, I can apply for this and get funding to try this, to try cover crops on my farm, for instance, something that I haven't been able to do because I don't have the money to buy the seed. I don't have the capacity to try this out because I don't know if it's going to work for me. And I don't want to lose space that I could be using for crops that I can sell for profit. So, these are the kinds of supports that we really advocate for. And we also just really want to shed a light on some of the solutions that already exist. We really push forward recommendations. They're not new technologies. These are tried and true practices that farmers have been doing for years, like cover cropping, like rotational grazing, these kinds of practices that are, very well used in Canada and have a proven track record for lowering emissions and growing resilience. And our focus is to really help empower other farmers to take on these practices with success.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe going back a little bit to the media, I would like to ask you this question. Do you think the media is a stakeholder in climate change is getting adequate support from the government and the other institutions in place for its role in disseminating climate news?
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a tricky question. I don't know if this is what you wanted to explore in asking me this, but I think the reality is that climate change has become a political issue. And I think we really need to continue to advocate for our media to be a neutral and nonpartisan source of information. Like I said at the beginning, media is a really critical player in helping us as citizens understand the crisis around us, and a crisis like climate change. I think things like calling, heat waves, and droughts and flooding, climate change related weather events is really important. And I don't know where the line between government support and ensuring that our media stays nonpartisan and objective and neutral in this. These are some really tricky conversations, but really important, because climate change is not a political issue. I don't know when. I'm sure there are a lot of studies that speak to when these kind of changes started happening, when climate change became more politicized, and maybe you can speak to that a bit more, Taku. But I think these conversations are hard in agriculture. A lot of farmers have been farming a certain way for a very long time, and changing practices is really hard. It's also really expensive. There's also a lot of risk. So I think climate change is a tricky conversation to have, but I think it's just really important that the media call it what it is, and that we start to normalize. Well, not normalize. I think that's the problem, is that heat waves, when we hear about them on the radio, upcoming this weekend, there's going to be, we're going through a heat wave here in Ottawa. Okay, well, I shouldn't feel like this is something that is just going to happen more and more every summer, and I just need to adapt, get another air conditioner, another fan for my apartment. It's really about understanding the correlation between that and climate change, and how we can work together to lower those impacts, because this is something that we really need attention on, and we really need to act on now.
Yeah, I feel that the media is really a crucial stakeholder in climate change, not only to the people who are directly involved, for example, in this context, the farmers, but also for people who wants to understand or to know what is happening within the farming industry. So the media is really an important stakeholder, because it communicates to the broad audiences. And I would maybe end with asking you this question: that what are your top recommendations for the media dealing with the climate change, and why?
I think I'll just reiterate a bit of how I answered the past question, which is to really name it what it is, and to help us understand these weather impacts and their relationship to the way our food is produced, and to understand that the weather that we're experiencing is a direct impact of climate change. And I think you're right, Taku, in saying that the media is a critical player in this conversation. They really do help to create that bridge, between the scientific information, the agriculture sector, any other sector as well, and citizens, and how it impacts our day-to-day life. I think really understanding the relationship between, climate change, the way our food is produced, and what that means for you and your family. Those are some really important things that we need. Our media is responsible for ensuring that we have that information. This is such an important part in us, like, understanding this crisis as a global community, and understanding that there are solutions. This doesn't have to be an overwhelming and sort of doomsday feeling crisis. We prove in our work at Farmers for Climate Solutions that there are solutions to this. We just need to act now, and we need government support to ensure that we can make this work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for also attending the interview, and also taking your time explaining all this to us, something that we didn't know about. Because for myself, I didn't know more about the first world agriculture and how it relates to climate change, or how it is answering the climate change questions. But you've shed more light on that, and thank you for it. I think right now we are in the age of the Anthropocene, which is the geological epoch where human activity has increased planetary pressure, therefore leading to wicked problems such as climate change and pandemics. So these are really important conversations to have at this time. And I really appreciate you sparing your time to discuss about these matters.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I think this brings us to the end of today's episode, and we have conversed a bit about the climate situation in the agricultural industry in Canada. And thanks to Gabriela, who has spared time to talk to us about this. So thank you, everyone. Please, if you have any comments, you can also put them in the comment section, and we'll see how to answer some of your questions and feedback on the next episode.